All right, Jeffrey. So here we are, another year of our floating rock called Earth revolving around the sun.
What?
Because it's another year
Oh,
in movies.
okay. How'd you feel about this year in movies?
I really enjoyed this year in movies.
Yeah.
I thought it was a great year.
I'm not the first person to say this, but I have a lot of movies I think are really good and like one or two that I think are great. That could be like a reflection of the way that I'm perceiving films as much as it could be a reflection of the films coming out. Could just be that I've seen so many films in my life that it's really easy to pick them apart and I don't feel as like attached to them as I once did. But either way, there's still plenty of things to appreciate this year.
That's great, Jeffrey.
Let's go myself.
As we do in our yearly list, we have 10 films that we picked out that are our favorite movies of the year.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know our list in each other's list in advance, so this is an exciting experience because we get to go through our list and have reactions to what the other put on their list. But before we do that, we'd like to get into our honorable mentions. They're the movies that we wish could have made the list, but alas, just weren't good enough to make it, I guess.
Well, that's
But
messed up.
they are really great films.
Yeah, you have to go first because I went first last year.
Oh, how do you remember that?
I would just watch it on the couch upstairs.
Oh, okay. All right, so going into my honorable mentions, they are Begonia, Train Dreams, Misericordia, Warfare, Is This Thing On, Twinless, and The Mastermind.
Nothing massively surprising there. I actually had a couple of overlap with your honorable mentions. So I really wanted Is This Thing On and The Mastermind on my list, and neither one made it. They're both on my honorable mentions, along with Surratt, Blue Moon, Sorry Baby, If I Had Legs, I'd Kick You, Plain Clothes, Familiar Touch, Misericordia, The Shrouds, Ephus, It Ends. Can I just take 1 second to talk about It Ends, which is on the Letterboxd video rental service and is a movie that premiered, I think at, I don't know, I can't remember. It premiered at a festival and it wasn't picked up, and Letterboxd is showing it until like midway through January. It was the horror movie that I was waiting for all year, that like high concept, low execution, a great idea that continually evolves throughout the framework and running time of the film that also doubles as an existential metaphor. I thought this movie was really good. And apparently because of its success on Letterboxd, Neon picked it up and is going to release it in theaters next year. So that's awesome. But anyway, you have an opportunity to watch it for at least another week. So I would really highly recommend that. And then my 11th and 12th films are House of Dynamite and Wake Up Dead Man. I really wanted House of Dynamite to make its way into the list, if only so that I could like shake my fist at the haters, because I think that movie is really good. And I think Catherine Bigelow, she's able to build suspense in a way that just no other director I know of can do it. But unfortunately, it was knocked out by Marty Supreme.
All right, so why don't you give us your 10th favorite film of the year?
It was Marty Supreme. I was looking at this and I was looking at House of Dynamite. To be honest with you, I prefer House of Dynamite a little bit to Marty Supreme, but Marty Supreme is such an achievement that I felt like putting it above House of Dynamite was just the right call. I think it's the better film. I think Timothée Chalamet is amazing in it. We do have a quite long full-length review where we go into all of it, so I won't talk about it for too long, but I think that movie absolutely deserves a spot in the top 10.
I completely agree with everything you just said. My number 10 is The Secret Agent. Really love this film. We also have a very in-depth review of this as well. You know what? I'm just going to say this off the top of the gate. A lot of these films we've done reviews for, so I'm going to put links to all the reviews for the films that we discuss in the description box below. So if you want to hear more of our thoughts on any of these movies and haven't seen them already, that's where you can find them. But The Secret Agent, I just love this film. I thought it was so textured and colorful. It was one of those films of the year where I just thought it was such a great ensemble piece of all these characters, even though we have this main focus on Wagner Moore's character in this film. Their experiences are so similar that they have this bond that you could just feel on screen without them actually knowing each other.
Yeah, completely.
Beyond that, I just love the way that it conceptually deals with memory and analyzing events in the past from the perspective of tapes and newspaper clippings, etc. There's just a lot to think about this film, and I love a film that keeps you going back and keeps you thinking about all these little details.
My number 9 is Sinners. So I think so much has happened since Sinners came out earlier in the year that it becomes really easy to forget what a moment that was, but it would be such an oversight to not include it because it's so expertly made. It's so soulful. It's really, really elegantly written and very intelligently written, especially in the opening stretches. Like, it's a film that basically takes place over a 24-hour time frame, and it has to give us the entirety of the history of this town, the cultures that it's diving into, and it needs to do that without feeling forced. And I think the film is really intelligently written in how it give us all of that information without it seeming like too blatant a force. Then you add in vampires, you add in commentary on communities, you add in the delicate rhythm of the world of blues music, and in and of itself, some magnetic performances that are brimming in this movie. Just absolutely terrific stuff from a slew of actors, new and old. It feels strange because this movie came out so long ago that I wanted to keep it in the back of my brain, like how much of a moment this was and how rare that we get a film that is the cocktail of all of the unique things that this film happens to be doing and do it so skillfully. And I'm really happy that this came out this year. I'm also even more happy that it's a roaring success. So that's awesome.
I completely agree. I think it's such a testament to what a great blockbuster can be or should be. Mission Impossible was such a letdown this year. And for a movie that's trying to be a blockbuster, Sinners really had that right. I'll have more to say about that in a little bit.
Okay.
But until we get there, my number 9 is Marty Supreme. So we were pretty close on the list with that one. But I completely agree with everything that you just said. It was just such a wild ride. It was so much fun and so textured and layered. And it has so much of the wonderful, is entrappings the right word I want to use, of cinema? Just like the things you love about cinema, from production design to the music, like everything is such in sync in this movie, and the acting is brilliant. And I just really enjoyed this film. We just talked about it like last week.
Yeah.
So I feel like I'm just treading old ground with this one, but it's such a great film. It's fun.
My number 8 is a movie I know you haven't seen, but I hope that some people will seek this out if they haven't. And it's a film called Urchin. It is Harris Dickinson's directorial debut. It's a film that many have said is in the spirit of Naked, which is a Mike Leigh film from 1993. That film is about this like utterly repugnant but wildly intelligent drifter. And it's an apt comparison, even if I think the character in Urchin is just a lot more sympathetic. Like, he's someone that he makes mistakes throughout the film, and as he does, like, all the time, you feel this pang of you should really know better, which is a lot different, I think, from the considerations that a film like Naked is making. But it has such an interesting structure that he is essentially like an addict for the first 20 minutes of the movie, and then he is clean for the rest of the movie, only to somewhat lose his way again towards the end in ways that I won't totally reveal. But in that end, the film becomes remarkably abstract, and there are these scenes of real devastating surrealism towards the end of the film that I'm still parsing through, and they're like as opaque in their meaning as they are connective tissue for some scenes that came before that I didn't totally know what to make of earlier in the narrative. And in those sequences, we see prior sequences explained, we see motifs deepened, we see metaphors that begin and end, and I think that this is just a really, really strong debut. And as the film gets more experimental, as it gets more off-kilter, the more interested I was. And I hope that Harris Dickinson and whatever he does next leans a bit more into that, because even with the conventional structure of the movie, there's a lot here that's really, really interesting. And I was as touched and moved by this film as I was kind of disturbed by it in an abstract way. So it was quite an achievement.
Going into number 8, that would be One Battle After Another for me.
Wow, that's pretty low.
Yes, I thought the same thing. It started going lower and lower because it was being replaced by films that I just really gravitated to or found a personal connection with. That doesn't mean that One Battle After Another is, like, I see it as a lesser film than these other films in terms of like the quality of it, because I think it's an astounding film from top to bottom that's just absolutely hilarious and has so much to say about our internal politics right now. You've been rewatching it like multiple times. So
yeah, I've seen it 4 times.
Every time you're watching it, I'm usually working in my office, but I hear it. There's just so much going on in these scenes, which is just elevated, I think, by Leonardo DiCaprio's character, who is just so manic. It just really helps with the pacing of this film to have a character that is just so over the top in his delivery, which is kind of Leonardo DiCaprio-esque in a lot of these recent films that he does. Yeah. There's just so much heart in the craft of this film, from the production design and the cinematography in particular. One of the best scenes of the year in my mind is that scene towards the end of the movie where the camera is going up and down over the hills.
Ocean waves.
And there's just so much tension in something so simple. And I will always be a fan of that in a film.
Yeah, this movie's a little higher up on my list, so I'll talk about it later. But I will say it's the most rewatchable movie on my list that I found out. I rewatched most of these movies, and that one is just so much easier to put on than virtually any other movie on my list. My number 7 is Eddington. We had a lot of films this year that I think tried to reckon with our current moment, and there aren't any, in my opinion, that are quite as incisive and quite as damning as Eddington is. About an hour into Eddington, when we watched it, I turned to you and I said, I think this is the most cynical movie I've ever seen. And I still maintain that that's true. Its indictments are so far-reaching, so all-encompassing. Even though I'd argue that it does see one side more dangerous than the other side, that doesn't mean that it doesn't exonerate one side over another. And I think it makes a very fatalistic portrait of the political climate nowadays in our country. And I often say that the personal is always political and the separation of two is just pure folly. And I think this is something that the film takes to its most cynical and sometimes most logical extensions. There are characters in this film that are BLM supporters simply so that they can talk to girls. There are people who get marginalized to the far right with conspiracy theories simply because they don't want to face their own inadequacies. We live in a world where we can express ourselves constantly and make ourselves the center of our own little universe, but the universe very rarely reflects back on us what we think of ourselves. And that inflated sense of self, if the universe keeps going on not giving it back to us, could become a really dangerous thing. And I think that's what this film is really getting at with its sense of identity and self-worth that we feel when the world is not really giving back the pain or like giving back the significance of the pain that we feel like that we have suffered. And I sometimes like shudder when I think of what this film is implying, because it essentially says that even to try to politely reason with your opponent is just to put them further into their own mindset, their own solipsism. And I don't believe that 100% of the time, but I believe it enough that I found this film really compelling. It's haunted me so deeply since. I thought it was so funny on a first watch, and then the second time I watched it, it just was so tragic to me. I feel sadly like as hopeless about our political future as this film seems to feel as well, or this film seems to purport. And I don't know what to do about that, but I do know that that's the measure of confrontational cinema. And Eddington really upset me this year, and I think it's a really extraordinary piece of work for that.
Yeah, when you turned to me that day and said, I think it's one of the most cynical films of the year, I think it's a mirror of the cynical times in which we live in. So any cynical view that the film has, I think, remains in the film's present tense. So I don't think it's really commenting on the future of anything. So for me, that doesn't really make it a cynical film. I feel like it's just more of an impressionist view on the cynical times.
You found hope in this film?
No, I'm just saying it doesn't remark on future hope or cynicism. It's just built into its current political moment. You could interpret that as like, because it's cynical in this current moment, that there is cynicism in the future, but just the way politics works, there's always a pendulum, and it always goes back and forth. And so I feel like the pendulum of too far one way is going to eventually lead to a pendulum that leads to something more positive in the future. So that's the way I look at it.
You sound very one battle after another, and I sound very Eddington.
Yes. That's actually a great way to put it. Yeah. That's exactly where my disagreement with the movie, if I had to disagree with you over your interpretation of the film, is that the film, I think, is too representative of the extreme bubbles that a big group of Americans find themselves in, but doesn't really highlight any of the people that don't exist in those bubbles. And I think that's where the cynicism ultimately failed a little bit of my connection to the film. I don't see a version of myself in that film. And I don't see a version of a lot of my friends in that film. I see versions of people I know in the film, for sure.
I see prior versions of you in the film, but you've grown out of them.
Never to that degree, okay? And I grew up in a very religious, conservative household.
No, I'm actually more talking about when you first discovered liberalism. I think it's kind of in the film, but you found better ways to temper it.
Oh, that's true. Okay.
Yeah. A lot of times, especially when a movie really goes overboard with its cynicism or like its ability to kind of rub your face in it, so to speak, I always think that a movie has to go there, and you don't always feel that way. And I find that that's a disparity between us a lot of the time. I will say that as far as the far left and far right parts of our country, I haven't seen them pathologized in quite this way. Like, I think it got the psychology of how you end up in those situations just right.
Yeah.
And I, again, even for all the films that tried to show us that this year, I don't know if anyone got it quite like as astute as or acute as this film did.
I agree with that sentiment. Going from there, I'm going to go with a film that I think balances cynicism well with different types of characters, et cetera, what I was just describing. And that would be No Other Choice as my number 7 film of the year. Because like we were just saying, there is a great cynicism about this film.
Definitely.
By the end of this film, you are left feeling devastated by the constant churning of capitalism. I would never compare Eddington to No Other Choice.
I think they have some things in common.
Yes, but since we're talking about that whole cynicism aspect, like this is a film that I think contains multitudes. And you see that in all these different characters, from the wife to the husband to the son to the daughter, just the way that they all deal with this larger issue, which is the unfettered capitalism that's taking over people's jobs and this second wave of machinery and technology that's coming in and replacing people's jobs. There is hope in this film, and that of the young daughter in the film to me, who really just cares about her craft and doing that well. And I think that's kind of the moral center of the film in the end.
Yeah, No Other Choice is actually not on my list. I think it's really, really great. I think it's actually mostly like a perfectly orchestrated film in many ways. It's funny, you find Eddington to be a touch hollow, and I find No Other Choice to be a touch hollow. And it's like kind of stupid to quibble with it because the movie's so good. There's an emotional disconnect for me with that film that I don't have with some of the other films on my list. But I think it's great.
You calling this film hollow offends me.
I'm not sure that the film allows itself to be messy in any way, which, because it's so perfect, I don't know. You'll see. You'll get whatever. I don't want to talk about No Other Choice all day. I think No Other Choice is great, so it's like stupid to argue about.
Yes, okay.
My number 6 is 28 Years Later, which is a movie that I absolutely love. This was such a huge surprise to me because Alex Garland's directorial career has been one disappointment after another, in my opinion. And I know that most people don't think that, but I think that. And Danny Boyle hasn't directed, in my opinion, a great movie in over a decade. To revive a franchise that's nearly 20 years old, that the first film really means a lot to me, actually. I think that first movie still rips. This movie is so much more than it needed to be. It didn't need to be like a commentary on the twilight of the British Empire. It didn't need to be a commentary on isolationism. It didn't need to be like a coming of age story where you have to face death for the first time. It didn't need to be all of those things. It didn't need to be like a philosophical treatise about how to mourn your loved ones. And it didn't need to be about masculinity and how people make up these stories so that they can feel like they're bigger men in the like village that they're in. That doesn't even get to the execution of the film that I think is brilliantly edited and has some of the most striking imagery of the year and is like viscerally exciting from top to bottom. This is the only movie this year that I cried during, and I cried both times I watched it. So I just think that there is really something here. I did not anticipate being this huge of a fan of this movie walking into it. So I really applaud this team that they are able to give us something that's ambition is so boundless that I really feel like they could have just phoned this in and they didn't.
I completely agree that this film ended up being so much more than I even expected it to be. I thought it was just going to be this horror film that I was going to walk in and feel scared by the entire time, which I was. And it was disgusting. Oh my gosh, that little house with the guy that was like thrashing under the bag, and he was like,
"Oh yeah, apparently the second one's disgusting." So can't wait.
Oh my gosh, I'm gonna
do a live reaction.
But the one thing I will disagree with is Alex Garland, because Warfare was actually one of the films, in your opinion. I'm going to be the Alex Garland defender on this channel, but Warfare was one of the films that I actually had difficulty not fitting onto this list because it was one of the most visceral watches that I had this entire year.
Definitely visceral.
I don't know a film this year that made me feel, besides If I Had Legs, I'd Kick You, that made me feel so sick to my stomach that I felt like I was going to puke during the movie. So much of war gets looked at from this larger grand perspective, especially if you think of like any World War II movie. They show war in this very stylized way that can be gritty at times, but in like a cinematic way. And I feel like this movie was just very authentic in the way it showed war for what it is and made you feel disgusted and revolted by it, where a lot of movies you're kind of rooting for a side.
Wait, is Warfare on your list or like?
No, it's not.
Oh, okay.
I'm
you're just talking about Alex Garland.
Yes, because you shat on him, so that's why I'm defending.
What's really weird is when he's writing movies he plans to direct, he's like the worst writer in the world, and when he writes scripts for other people, they somehow are great. And by the way, I also think that of all the films he wrote before he started directing, there's a lot of great scripts in there. So I don't know what's happening, but anyway, we don't need to relitigate Alex Garland. You know how I feel.
Well, I had to say something because you went into a whole diatribe about him and his filmmaking as a director. Anyways, my number 6 film of the year is Plain Clothes by Carmen Emmy. And this film is just one I personally bonded with and connected with. I think it's just a great reflection on the stages of coming out, dealing with the way society has pushed you away into a box in which you feel like you can't be publicly yourself. And I think that the beginning of the film dealing with that has so much in communication with the end of the film, with this release of all this pent up anxiety and frustration with how your life has been pushed to the margins, in which you have to eventually fight for it. I just absolutely connected with this film. I bonded with it. I thought the use of different filming styles with the DV camera footage. It just really highlighted this very specific time and place.
I love this movie. We both loved this movie when we saw it at Sundance, and I think that everything you're saying is totally correct. And I love how this movie is able to be like so romantically involving and almost touching in a way, and soulful, but also like a visceral thriller. Like, this movie is very exciting, and I think that the end of this film is a release of a pressure valve that is completely needed, I think, for how intense the film can get at times. So yeah, it's a great one. My number 5 is Afternoons of Solitude. So Albert Serra made my number 1 movie of 2023 in Passive Fiction. I'm a huge fan of his. I actually still have to watch his older films. I haven't seen those. But anyway, this is a very hypnotic, completely focused, richly metaphorical film that are about the oddities and barbarism of historical convention when put in a modern context, the fragile egotism of great men, quote unquote. And I think the delicate balance between who you are backstage and who you are during a performance. This film is just so wondrously rich, but it lulls you into its really hypnotic rhythms in this very dark way. It's almost like, again, I keep saying hypnotic, but it really is like being under hypnosis. And it propagates this inquisition into like a vast array of cultural contradictions. And to me, I left this film just being like, it's a film about bullfighting, I should say. And there's a lot of violence towards bulls, and it's real violence because this is what happens every day in Madrid, in Spain. It's not like an animal rights documentary. There's no voiceover. There's barely any dialogue. It's mostly like sound design and observing this person when he's performing, when he's doing bullfighting, and when he is backstage and when he's getting ready for performances and stuff. I just left with this like hollow feeling in a good way of just like, why does this exist at all? I found it really profoundly moving. I will say, as a trigger warning, I did not enjoy watching this movie because I do not enjoy violence against animals. So if you don't feel like you could sit through that, I think it's completely understandable. But this is it's a really hypnotic and interesting film, and it's unlike any film I saw this year.
All right, well, going from there in a completely different direction, my number 5 is Blue Moon. Richard Linklater does what Rich Linklater does in this film, which is just this extremely heavy dialogue-driven character study, and one that just has some wonderful stylistic flourishes for the amount of space in which they're utilizing. From the bar to the little gathering side to the back right-hand corner to the front door, I could visually see this entire set in my head after seeing the movie like 2 months ago, which I think is really a testament to how well you can utilize a space and film it to make it memorable. I think Ethan Hawke is just fantastic in this role. He is absolutely electric. He portrays this character that is hurting so much under the surface, and there is so much to bite into with absolutely every line that he delivers in this film and the way he interacts with all these other characters. I just love that this film really knew that it was about examining this character and saying, how can we, like 90 minutes to 2-hour runtime, get as much out of him and portray as much about him in a grander perspective so that you walk out of that film feeling like you know more than just that 2-hour period, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. I think that's the greatest success of that film.
My number 4 is The Secret Agent, which is a film as unpredictable and unyielding as any film I think that we saw this year. It was the first film that we saw at New York Film Festival. I did not know that it would end up being my favorite film that we saw at New York Film Festival, but when I was talking about how No Other Choice is so perfect that it doesn't allow itself some messiness, I think that The Secret Agent has this deliberate kind of lackadaisical style that it finds itself in some scenes of non sequiturs that gives it so much more color as a result. And as tightly wound as a lot of the second half is, especially when we start talking about how complex the themes are and how multifaceted a lot of the characters are, and especially this story, which has all of these different strands that it manages to bring together towards the end. We have time jumps. We have the same actor playing multiple people. There's a lot going on in this film. We've only seen it once, so we have, unfortunately, only our memory to go back and rewatch the film at this point and think about all the ways in which it's one of the most unique experiences this year.
I completely agree. So going into my number 4, it's one that you've already discussed as well, and that is Ryan Coogler's Sinners. Surprised it remained as high on my list after seeing it.
Did you rewatch it?
I did not rewatch it.
Oh, it's great.
But it's just one of those films that I keep thinking back to. And of all the films on my list, this is the highest one that I would say is the biggest ensemble piece with the amount of characters that has going on and maybe the grand nature of it, if that gives you any indication to where I'm going from here on my list. But this film just did such a great job balancing its tone, all these genres, and all of its characters for being such a big ensemble piece. It manages to be so big and so bold while also being so intimate and small all at the same time. It's just such a wild ride, but in the end, we end up with this beautiful portrait of a man who just lived for his passions. I don't like films that are scary and stuff like this.
Yeah.
And this film had me on the edge of the seat, but also I felt like I was having a ball.
Yeah.
I don't know many films that can make me feel that way.
Yeah, as far as like mainstream big films go, they don't get that good that often. My number 3 is One Battle After Another, which is a great movie. Every podcast that I listen to has had like 9 podcasts about this movie. Like, I really don't know what I could add to the discourse. Going to what I said before, it's endlessly rewatchable, terrific performances. Paul Thomas Anderson is a filmmaker that means a lot to me. I've been following his work since like literally, I think the first movie of his I saw in the movie theaters was Punch Drunk Love in 2003. I always generally kind of like his movies. Licorice Pizza I didn't love, and I didn't love Inherent Vice. I did like Phantom Thread, but he hasn't made a movie that really knocked me out since The Master. And, 13 years later, he still has something in him that I think is really worth saying. He's just like so finely detailed about how he's weaving in all of these dense characterizations, touching on political themes of the current climate, and weaving in like a story that's extremely propulsive. This movie is 2 hours and 30 minutes long, and there's not an ounce of fat on it. It absolutely flies by. It's so funny. It's so relentlessly entertaining. Not that I thought it was going to be bad, but I didn't realize it would be this good. So I'm glad it's here.
My number 3 is Sorry Baby. This film is so good. I love nothing more than a small movie about big things. Movies where you just get to sit in the heart of a character for an hour and a half and learn about them and their perspectives. Ava Victor pulls off just a miraculous film, which is by far one of the funniest, heartbreaking, and heartwarming films of the year. I don't know many films that could balance those 3 things and jump from them so seamlessly. I think Twinless was probably the only other one that I could think of this year that just would go from complete moments of hysterics to quiet reflection and sadness and grief and trauma.
Yeah, sorry, I was just thinking about the joke where she has to describe herself and she says tall.
Yeah. I have not gone through the experiences that this character has gone through, but you can also relate to a lot of her experiences in your own traumas. The way that she sees this cat and she picks it up from the street and she just holds it, and it's like this cuddly thing that gives her warmth because the cat is something that doesn't judge you or has anything to say about what you've been through. It's just there to be comforting. It's one of those films that's not big and bombastic, and it doesn't have anything to say on this grand scale. It doesn't have these big political ambitions that a lot of these other films did this year. I'm going to talk about this a little bit more as we go through the last 3 films of mine, but it's these films that really deal in the micro elements of human life. If I had to pick a theme of my top 3 films of the year, the focus is on the smaller things. And those things, I think, translate into the bigger things.
Like, especially if you're going to make a film about what she goes through, I think that there's like a very delicate balance that you could be exploitative in a certain sense. There's also a balance that you could be triggering somebody in the audience unnecessarily. So it's like, how do I convey this information in a way that's respectful and shows the gravity of the situation, also without exploiting the situation? And this film chooses to simply show a house, the house during the day, the house in the evening, and the house late at night, and she walks out horrified, and we know exactly what happened. And that's what great filmmaking is all about, is being able to communicate something with grace, elegantly and eloquently, without really rubbing your face in it, and having a respect for your audience. And I thought that was just like a tremendous idea that she had to show that. I think maybe you should say your number 2.
I think we have our top 2 are the same.
I think our top 2 might be the same.
They might be flipped, but I am
maybe
shocked because we have gone through this list and I'm like, there's 2 films that you have not mentioned and I have not mentioned, and they could be flipped or they're the same, but I am still nonetheless surprised that I think our top 2 films of the year are the same.
I think so too. My number 2 is On Becoming a Guinea Fowl.
My number 2 was It Was Just an Accident.
My number 1 is It Was Just an Accident.
My number 1 is On Becoming a Guinea Fowl. This is crazy.
This is crazy.
This never happens.
No, this never happens. I'm kind of sad that they're flipped in a way, because I thought having the same top 2 is cool, but like having the same number 1 and number 2 is really cool. But anyway,
well, we could talk about them just
let's talk about them in tandem.
And I really love both of these films, so it could have potentially, depending on the day and the watch, maybe gone differently.
You rewatched it
Yeah.
for our best our best movies of the year so far. I watched half of it with you. I rewatched it on my own a couple weeks ago, and I thought this was like a 10 through 5 movie, and I was like, oh, this is a number 2 movie. This is like extremely skillful. A film about sweeping trauma under the rug and the dangers of adhering to tradition. And I told you when we saw this film that I thought in a time where marginalized communities are being targeted, and I think like are the subject of a lot of unnecessary stuff online and a lot of jokes, that the idea of calling any kind of tradition from a marginalized community into question is a dangerous thing to do. And I thought that this film did it so skillfully in a way that wasn't dangerous at all, but was looking for a way to break through and say that it doesn't need to be this way. In some ways, this is the most intelligently crafted movie of the year. Like, not a single thing is out of place. I was on the edge of my seat with every little thing that this filmmaker was doing, whether it was the surrealistic flourishes or the bit of funny satire or the harrowing revelation or the ways that this film ends with a call to arms in a certain way, and it is so packed with such like bold statements about where we are.
Yeah, and it's a film I just keep coming back to in my head over and over again. It's so deeply personal and intimate, and it has so much to say about family dynamics, the protection of memory and those undeserving, and the realization of the toxic environment that lets such bad behavior thrive and persist. But as I was saying with Sorry Baby, with so many issues in the world, I think a lot of films tend to look at these issues from this macro perspective. As much as, I mean, Sinners was high up on my list, One Battle After Another was high on my list, but there is this grander perspective that these movies tend to slip themselves into. This film chooses to remain on this very micro level by just focusing on this main character and her family the entirety of its runtime. And that's why I love this film so much, is because it's highlighting this very particular issue that exists within just a family unit, but is so important in a grander perspective, even though the film doesn't really comment on that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, sure. You know, we could say this about both number 1 and 2, that I think that they're films that are structured like thrillers, that they have like a certain discomforting quality that's engaging the way you're watching a thriller, but they're both full of boundless empathy.
I completely agree on that front. And in terms of this movie, you had mentioned about how this film is about calling out that bad behavior, and that happens very particularly at the end, but it made me think of something. This movie is so visually aware of the communication it's having with its characters, because this final moment, we have this communication via a sound of an animal rather than words. What we see throughout the film with this running show that's playing about there's like this animal show that's talking about animals, and particularly the guinea fowl. The noise from that animal and what that represents in the show, how that's utilized right at the end, says everything that we need to know about this moment rather than having it said to us. And this movie does such a great job in so many different ways of showing and not telling. And one of the things that you were telling me actually recently in your most recent watch that I didn't even think about it, but there's this pantry that all the women who are pretty much on the outside of this family, they keep going there for safety and to have their talks to each other. About like 3/4 into the movie, that space is invaded by all the older women in the family who come in with their tradition, and they try to manipulate them back into forgetting about what happened to them.
Don't you know that we love you?
Yes, it's so manipulative, and it gives me panic every time I think about it because it's so real and personal to my own life. But the way that this pantry had like a second meaning and a second purpose, it was this place of safety, and then it was invaded. And so then the safety becomes in their connection with each other. And I love the way that they go to the hospital and they get their, is it like their cousin or something like that? Another person, the family member, they get her out, and then they're coming back with all the kids. The main uncle has fathered throughout time, and they come back and they're all together there in a unit. And I think that shows that the safety isn't in the pantry and hiding away. The safety is in sticking together and shining a public light on the bad behavior.
In broad daylight.
Yes. So I don't know. There's just so much to talk about this film.
Yeah, no, it's really great. It's really, really great.
As we're going into It Was Just an Accident, that is another thing that movie does absolutely extremely well. In the showing, not the telling, in the detail. And you could go on from there if you want, because that's your number 1.
I said this in our review, but I found this film difficult to reckon with. Not its ideas, like I hadn't thought about them before, but the way that it's diving so deeply into them in a way that's so utterly confrontational that I feel like you leave the theater kind of spellbound. It's a remarkably difficult and confrontational film about the limits of mercy, and at what point do we quit a cycle of violence? Just a relentlessly exciting, tense experience that's profoundly moving and yet more than meets the eye and leaves you with all of these layers to contemplate. Like I talked about the last half hour of this film, and I'm going to use the same word that I used back then, which is breathless. Like it's some of the most breathless filmmaking I saw all year, where you can feel your heart rate ticking up. And at the same time, some of your heart rate ticking up isn't just the thrill of the moment. Some of it has to do with the profound truism of what you're seeing on screen. It really haunted me, this film, and it haunted me the second time I watched it too. I think it's like a miraculous achievement.
This is what I think is the spellbinding feature and quality to this film. With a lot of these political films that we've had this year, I think a lot of them have dealt with the consequence of action. This film deals with the current political landscape so differently than a lot of these other films. And that's one of the reasons I find so much power in it, because it has something different to say, because it's really looking at political injustice and how to respond to it. And we see all these varying perspectives in our different characters in the film of how they want to respond to this political injustice that they've gone through. But it's really that these characters are doing all this self-reflection on their own and seeing the limits of their own morality. But I also just want to say another thing that I loved about the film, and it's not really anything the film is intentionally doing. This film wasn't here to reflect our experiences in life. It was filmed in Iran, and it really has to do with their political climate right now. But I think unintentionally so, this film transcended its own commentary into something much larger about how we morally deal with political injustice, just because political injustice is happening here as well. So it might not be happening in the same exact way, but I think there's something about politics that transcends just one country. Americans can see themselves from this very particular lens, and they think other countries are extremely different from them, and they think people are very different from them. I think a lot of times people from these varying perspectives will throw the others at the margins. And I think this is one of those films that unintentionally so takes away that line, because you're seeing the experiences of people in a different country that people have so many particular thoughts about. Who doesn't think of Iran and has been leveled by some sort of propaganda in the media about what it's like to live there? And this film shows in a way the same war that plays out politically anywhere in the globe. It's just a little bit more extreme there right now because they have a harsher military dictatorship that's currently running that country.
You know, it's actually something that Asghar Farhadi said when he won an Oscar for A Separation. He was like, you know, I made this film about what happens in our living rooms and in our kitchens, and it's not that different from your living rooms and your kitchens. You hear something about dictators in Iran or politicians in Iran who are doing all these terrible things, and meanwhile, there are all these people that are just living their lives under this dictatorship. I think It Was Just an Accident is part of a long line of great Iranian films. I've actually dove into some Iranian films from the 90s and the 80s, and it's a treasure chest. It's an embarrassment of riches there. So I'm very happy to have this as my number one film. When we walked out of the theater, you know, and as someone who watches a lot of movies, I said to you, I was like, I really don't think it's going to get better than that this year. And at least for me, it did not. So,
well, that's exciting. Our top two films being not in the same order, but the same films.
That's maybe why they're great. If you think about the differences we had with some of our films in 10 through 5, maybe that's why these movies are so good, is because there is a universality to them that your perspective and my perspective can meet in the middle and love these films.
I completely agree. So I think that's it. Do you have any other thoughts?
No, I'm good.
Well, I hope you all enjoyed this video where we discussed our top 10 films of the year. Let us know in the comments, what were your favorite movies of the year? Did you like our list? Do you hate our list? Let us know that too. We'd be happy to hear.
Yeah, we love that stuff, actually. Genuinely.
Is there anything we missed? Was there anything that didn't end up on our honorable mentions or our list that you think was worthy of recognition here? Let us know. As always, thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you next time.